Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you. Featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. Today I'm very, very proud, and, when you do my kind of job, you get very excited about the people you interview, and the person today, her name is Deidre Reigel. Now, she's a classically trained singer, dancer, pianist, composer, conductor. Oh, that's a mouthful, Deidre. But this dynamically evolving woman has recently added author to her list of life accomplishments. Now, let's talk a little more about Deidre. Deidre's professional journey has taken her to Eastern Europe, Japan, Canada, and all around the United States. I want to welcome you to my show, Deidre, and I want you to kind of continue to tell us a little bit about your book. So, welcome to the Susan Brender Show, Deidre Reigel.
Well, Susan, first of all, thank you for your time, and thank you for the lovely send-off. It was very much appreciated. I am delighted to be here with you today to talk about my book. It has been a journey that began back in 2009 when I was able to heal my relationship with my father. And what's most remarkable about that is that my father had been deceased since 1973. And the pain that had been in that relationship, the disappointment, the frustration, had been something I had resigned myself to that I would probably be living with the rest of my life. And I accepted the fact it would probably color all of my relationships with myself, with men, with people, even with my career. And it clouded my vision from seeing the gifts that my father had actually given me. And the ironic part of the healing that happened around my father was that I was housemates with one of my theater friends at the time, and his father came to Florida, where we were living, to visit and stayed with us. And I remember his father, his name is Steve, came into my end of the house and stood by my baby grand piano and began to talk about how he himself how his parents had given him piano lessons when he was a young child. And Steve actually bears a strong resemblance to my father as I remembered him. And in that moment, I was able to see my father in a completely different light and saw the man and all that he dealt with and lived with and put up with so graciously and with such dignity, and was able to see the gifts he had given me rather than the gifts that I thought he had not. And at the moment, Steve knew nothing about it, but I remember the tears stinging in the back of my eyes and just thought the moment was so precious. And later on in the day, the rest of the tears began to flow, and I sat down that evening and wrote the first ever kind letter to my father and just expressed myself as the tears poured and poured. In fact, I thought I couldn't write fast enough, and I just sensed his presence in the room with me. The forgiveness flowed, the understanding, and I think the root of the forgiveness was to understand the man and the fact that he lived with extremely difficult circumstances. His wife, my mother, was a chronic alcoholic, and she had her own pains that were unresolved, and yet he managed to be the best father he ever could that he could have been. And so I wrote the first ever kind letter to my father.
Oh, wow.
And it was truly a wow moment.
Yeah.
And sat on it for a couple of days, and then began to share the information with some of my friends, especially my women friends. Mm-hmm. And each one of them, Susan, came to me later and said, I've had a difficult relationship with my father, and I realize it's poisoning me, and I need to address it. I need to go heal my relationship with my father. And some of them had fathers who were still living, and I encouraged them to do this now. But what came out of it, I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if these women were to also write letters to their fathers once they had been able to heal, or if other people were able to write letters of gratitude and praise to their fathers. And what if these letters were to be published in a book that would serve others and would perhaps even go around the world with this information and serve others in helping them either assess their relationships with their fathers or heal them, rejoice in them, celebrate them, improve them, whatever the case may be. And that was the beginning of the book, now known as My Letter to My Father.
Wonderful. Now let's. Do you have your book in front of you, by the way?
I do.
Okay. Open it up to the prologue. I'd like the audience to hear just a little tidbit of what you wrote in the book.
Thank you for asking. In June of 2009, a series of amazing events caused me to reevaluate my relationship with my father. This led to profound forgiveness and healing. As I shared my story with friends, I heard them say things such as, "I know I need to forgive my father." I knew immediately that to share my own story with many could be a helpful tool, whether it be a story of healing or celebration. The creation of this book has been an act of love for myself, all the contributing writers, and those who influenced me to pursue and complete this project, the wonderful publishing team of Balboa Press, and you, the reader. As for me, I have my father back. He is in my heart mind of love. And he has me back, his only child, a daughter who has taken the lessons of courage and love her father taught.
You know, that's a wonderful, wonderful statement. What do you attribute to the fact, Deidre, that so many people have issues with their families and it affects them in so many different ways? I mean, there was a time, I would imagine, where there was no time to regret, no time to really think about how your, parents made a difference in your life. But today, it seems that there's so much neurosis and so many problems. What do you attribute to that?
What a great question, Susan. First of all, my experience has been in the family unit, we're most vulnerable. We're most exposed. We go out in the world, we put on our presentational faces, we put on our armor, and we deal with the world. But when we come home, we're open and we're vulnerable. And of course, this is, for most people, this is the first love relationship we ever have. So right there, we're laid bare for anything that can happen. And as children, we may not be aware of what our parents are experiencing. They may say and do things that we don't understand or we misinterpret as being not love or being unsupportive or being hurtful when in fact it could have been something else. So a child doesn't, I think, have the ability to process or differentiate or even to understand the stresses that an adult deals with in their daily life. So right there, confusion begins. And what I have discovered in my personal journey is that this confusion is passed from generation to generation to generation.
That's right.
I believe that each generation tries to do it one better than their parents. Remember when we said, well, I'll never do that, speaking of what our mother or father had just done. And maybe we don't because we've been focused on avoiding that, but we might fall into another trap in our lives and pass it on to our children. So combine those two things of being, very, very vulnerable and the misinterpretation. And we grow up to be a version of our parents. What I think can break that is the inner healing that happens when we're able to go back and retrieve that young child who did misinterpret parental information.
What's the way? Yeah, I'm sorry,
yeah.
Go ahead, Deidre.
No, please. That's all right, please.
What I'm curious about is, because there are so many issues between parents and kids, how should a person deal with it? Should they go to a quote-unquote shrink? Should they talk to a friend? Should they share it with their parent? What's the best way to kind of get that catharsis out?
Well, here's my smart aleck answer for the day, Susan. D, all of the above.
Okay.
and I really and thank you for letting me say that. But you proposed wonderful scenarios. I think everybody has their own path. Everybody has their own way, and to hire a professional counselor to guide you through this is absolutely important for many people. To talk with your friends can be very helpful. You see that I shared with my friends, and that gave me the idea to produce a book, which I hope goes on to help heal people and help inspire people and help people celebrate. And I think, and this is probably the scariest one, to sit and actually converse with your parents when you feel you are ready to do that, and hopefully in a calm fashion. So I think all of those approaches are very important to be considered, and each of us will choose our own path and probably use all of those approaches. Susan, your question was brilliant, really.
And now another thing I want to know is, don't you think that kids, and now I'm talking about whether it's young kids or teenagers or, sort of, I call them the adult kids, don't you think that there's a certain kind of information and education that should be offered to them in school? I would love to see kids talk about their relationships with their parents and get out their troubles, because what a wonderful way for kids to start off their life knowing that there could be problems and expressing them, because then we wouldn't have kids shooting up in schools and feeling anger and feeling distress because they don't know how to get it out. So don't you think the schools should have a program where maybe they even introduce your book?
Susan, I absolutely agree with you and think you are completely right. And this, of course, involves a revamp of our educational system, which could be another whole conversation you and I could have, because, we learn wonderful things in school, but we have some big important pieces missing in our education. And I think one of them is, how do we really have relationship with ourselves, and how do we really have relationship with others? And as I said, and you're saying the same thing, in the family, to have that communication is absolutely critical. But, we don't come with instruction manuals, so we all have to learn this together. Now, I'm part of the baby boomer generation that learned to repress and suppress our feelings and our emotions and, put up and shut up and just deal with life and stuff all those emotions. And we all know now that they will come out in very insidious and damaging ways, whether it's alcoholism, drugs, or corporate raidership, or womanizing, or manizing, or whatever it is that we're doing that is very destructive. We know that. We absolutely know that. But without the tools learned as young people, we can fall into the trap. What I'm seeing now is just what you're talking about, this idea that we need to learn how to effectively communicate our feelings, take responsibility for them, each of us take responsibility for them, and talk about why those feelings are occurring, and clear up the misconception and clear up the unmet needs, the unexpressed emotions, and do it in a way that is loving, supportive, and informative, so that we can all create together a better way of living.
Yes. Now, let's skip. We talked a lot about, of course, the relationships in your book, but let's get a little kind of joy. And I want to, I mean, it's a great subject, and needless to say, there is one more thing I want to kind of talk about, and that is, we have a president today who's trying to take away various things in our health plan. Should this be, if a kid or if an adult wants to really kind of speak to a shrink or somebody of that nature, don't you think that the government should pay for it or not?
Oh, that's a controversial question, Susan. Yeah. The larger answer would be, and I know we're off topic here, but I have been since the 70s, when I did a short stint working in a hospital, a big proponent of national health care done properly. And what we have right now is a system that, yes, has made a step toward that, but it still falls, in my opinion, far short of what is truly needed. We've not quite gotten where we need to be. So my personal opinion is that healthcare is a universal service that needs to be available to everyone on an equal basis. And if the care of the mind, the heart, the emotions, the psyche is part of that, then so be it. And I'm a firm believer that our medical and physical ailments are rooted in emotional distress and dis-ease. And when we really, really want health, we have emotional stability and emotional health. And from there, the body can live a life that basically can be disease-free.
Yeah.
So that's the best answer I can give to your question.
Well, I think that's a great answer, Deidre. Many people need to understand that psychological or mental issues have not been the first choice or the priority of our government nor our society, but certainly.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah, and we need it so much. So let's skip now and talk a little bit about your music. When I introduced you, you talked about the fact that you're both a singer, a dancer, a pianist, a composer, a conductor. I mean, these are amazing things. And tell our audience all about what you do and how it's affected your life.
Oh, gosh, what a great question. Thank you for asking. Well, first of all, I want to credit my parents. My mother, for all of her dis-ease, noticed when I was a young child that I had a voice, and I would remember her saying to our friends and neighbors, "Deidre loves to sing." And I thought, "I do?" And she said, "Well, she sings all the time." And I thought, it must be true. And I noticed I was singing all the time. And I did all the things that a child, with talent does. The garage was my stage, and everywhere I went was my stage, and I was loving to sing. And as I mentioned in my book, it was my father who, after a long week of traveling on the road, would make sure I was driven to my piano and voice lessons on a Saturday morning. So I really, really, really at this point want to credit my parents for recognizing the talent and doing their very best to see that I got the early training that a child needs. So I came up as a singer and classically trained and did the piano work. In high school, picked up the flute, which came very naturally, and learned to conduct. And then in my early 20s, which is very late, I began to study ballet, tap, and jazz, and found that I loved to dance, and then sang a lot of opera as a mezzo-soprano, worked my way into that, and then went into conducting because, quite frankly, I was a little worn out with singing opera. My joke is that if you're a mezzo-soprano in the opera world, you play either a man, a maid, or a prostitute, and I was a little worn out with doing that, so I turned to conducting, and that was just opened up a whole other world for me, and really cut my eye teeth in the opera pit, which is quite a challenge, and loved every moment of it because I understood both sides of the picture. I understood the player's dilemma, having played in orchestras. I understood the singer's dilemma, and I was able to bring those two worlds together as I stood on the podium, and that was a very gratifying time. I also, for a long time, produced my own Broadway Vegas review show with my then husband, and we did a lot of work for about 10 years. Had a 7-piece band and dancers, and I found myself doing the choreography and designing the sets and performing and doing all that it took to produce the show. And then went to Quebec as a singer-dancer for 3 years. Loved every moment of that. Came back to the States and decided I wanted to start my own opera orchestra. And within about 6 months, I had a 32-piece orchestra and built it up to I had 6 principal singers who sang with me, and then we developed about a 20-member chorus. And Susan, that was just a labor of love. I was able to bring all of the skills that I had garnered in my life together to really create a community of people and to build something very loving and very positive. And one of the most, I think, the most enjoyable things in the groups and the experiences that I created was that I created community. And, of course, this probably came from my need to create a family situation because I had not had that growing up.
Right. And
yet I believe that properly used and properly given and received, it can be a wonderful thing. And so it was a very successful time for me in many ways, including on the emotional level. And my people stayed with me for long periods of time. They knew they were safe. They knew they were loved, protected, respected. Our audiences felt that. And we did some very amazing things in making opera accessible to audiences, both psychologically and financially. Our shows were always very well received, and it was just a very, very, very gratifying time to give to the community that way. And, of course, out of my orchestra, being visible as a conductor, came the opportunities to go to Europe, which was, again, those experiences were truly life-changing as I began to understand the power of music. When you're standing in front of the Bulgarian National Symphony and you don't speak Bulgarian, they don't speak English.
Right.
You have to find a way to communicate, and when you understand that country was a communist country and that you're standing there with love in your heart to give these people love, and you feel that response, and their orchestra manager comes to you and says, I've never heard this orchestra play this way, and you realize they mean that as a compliment. Mm-hmm. And you go back a year later and they open their hearts to you and stand and applaud, and they don't have to do that. You realize that music and love have power that can literally change the world and can supersede the political environment and anything else we wish to say, well, the world will never get any better, because it can and it does.
That's right. Yeah. It's a very interesting thing, Deidre. When you go around the world, one of the things that brings people together is music. In fact, even in wartime, and I remember seeing something about World War II. You remember they used to have a special place where, many of the actors, like, I can mention many, but they used to bring music, they used to bring dance, they used to bring theater to the troops. And during that time, when they were doing that, it was like the most peaceful, it was the most glorious time for the military. That's what music does. Don't you agree?
I absolutely agree. And to ratify that, Lynn Walker was kind to introduce you and me. Both she and her husband, Morris, were on USO tour in Vietnam. And they have amazing stories to tell about going into that scene, that difficult arena, and changing the energy by getting on stage and sharing their gifts. And that is huge, Susan. That is huge.
I believe it. And the other thing also that I want you to tell our audience about is, people don't really understand what a composer, conductor does. I mean, they stand up there, you see them waving their wand and, getting the orchestra to play the most beautiful songs. But the reality is that, what is it? Kind of define what a conductor, what a composer does, and how it affects the orchestra.
Oh, well, I'm laughing with joy that you've asked that question. Let me start with the composer. For me, the process is just pulling the notes down from heaven, if you'll pardon the expression, but putting notes on a piece of paper in such a fashion that will create a specific effect for the listener, whether it's joy, sorrow, total expression. I'm creating total expression for whatever the instrumentation is or whatever the purpose is. What the musicians do then, the musicians and singers, is they look at those little dots on a piece of paper that the composer has put there, and they're the ones who actually bring them into the world of sound. In other words, they bring them to life. What the conductor does is stands in front of those musicians, and with great reverence for the composer's intentions, and the musicians who are bringing those notes to life, the conductor encourages full expression of the musician's interpretation of a composer's work.
Wow!
So it's a threefold process, and I've been in all three of those positions. And I'm telling you, each one is sacred, each one is a sacred trust, and one is no more important than the other. They are all equally important, and it is a privilege to do any one of those three jobs.
That's fantastic. Well, we're almost at the end of the show, so let's wrap it up, Deidre. Is there anything that you want to tell our audience that really they should know? Because you're an amazing person. You've had so many experiences, and I'm sure there is some words of wisdom that you'd like to give our audience.
Well, thank you again. Thank you for asking that. Life is good. That's what I would say. Life is good. Life is meant to be enjoyed to the fullest. I believe that when we work inside ourselves and we can truly assess the magnificent beings we are, we open ourselves up to a completely different way of life that can be so positive and so wonderful. When we heal our deepest wounds, we can find new joy. Whatever the tools are that we need to use that, so be it. My privilege on this planet is to be a tool giver, whether it's my music, that can guide the way, whether it's this book, whether it's conversing with me, simply my presence. So I love to provide tools for people to access their highest and their best, and even work with their shadow side to understand that life is good. So yeah, my mission is for my music and my book to literally go around the world, and that's what I'm on the planet to do.
And so, where can people purchase your book?
Either on Amazon, of course. The best and easiest place to purchase it is on Balboa Press. That's BALBOA Press.com. Or people can go to my website, and I invite our audience to my website. It's DeidreReigel.com, and that is DeidreReigel.com. And on my website, you can purchase my 2 CDs that I have for sale. You can see my music video called All That Matters Is Love, and you can even purchase my book on my website. So that's DeidreReigel.com.
Today my guest has been a trained singer, dancer, pianist, composer, conductor, and now an author of a very special book called My Letter to My Father, and her name is Deidre Reigel. And if you want to read something that'll just inspire you to live a life, as she says, live a perfect life, this is the book you want to read. So thank you again, Deidre Reigel, for being on the Susan Brender Show.
Thank you, Susan. I hope your day is fabulous.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.